My travels have brought me to the Tredegar Iron Works, located here on the banks of the James River in the heart of Richmond, Virginia. The ironworks date back to 1837, when the mill first opened and began smelting iron on the site. Today, the mill has been closed for nearly 70 years. Now, it's a National Historic Site and the site of the American Civil War Museum here in Richmond. The Tredegar Iron Works played a vital role in the Confederacy during the American Civil War, as it supplied the South fully one half of its artillery pieces. However, the ironworks were established here along the James River long before the Civil War. As I mentioned, Tredegar began producing iron here in 1837. It fed the country's growing appetite for iron, which was primarily fueled by the need to build railroads. Railroads were barely 15 years old when Tredegar opened its doors, and the country was very busy building railroads to span the nation's vast expanses and connecting towns and cities that were popping up as the country expanded westward. The anchor is from the CSS Virginia and was cast right here at Tredegar Iron Works. The National Park Service's Richmond branch is headquartered here at the site, and the cannon tube here on this artillery piece was one that was produced right here at Tredegar. Inside the Park Service building, some of the original walls of the old ironworks still stand, now protected from the elements. Through the brick arch in the distance is the American Civil War Museum, which is my next stop. The arch was once part of the old foundry's wall, which today nicely frames the museum's entrance. Inside the building, you find the remnants of what I believe to be the back wall of the foundry, now protected from the weather, under which I find this 3.3-inch rifled cannon and carriage. This cannon is the only surviving rifled artillery piece made during the Civil War at John Clark's New Orleans foundry, a manufacturer of furnaces, railway car axles, and cotton presses. At the outbreak of war, his foundry began casting cannon tubes by private contract from individual regiments, notably the Washington Artillery of New Orleans. Most have heard that the American Civil War pitted brother against brother, but here's a real-life example of just that. John Summerfield Petty and James Thomas Petty fought on opposite sides. One brother for the Confederacy, one for the Union. When war erupted, the Virginia-born Petty brothers found themselves on opposing sides. They dreaded the idea of facing one another in combat. James Thomas joined a Virginia regiment in 1861, while the younger John Summerfield, then living in Ohio, answered President Lincoln's call for Union volunteers in 1862. James Thomas wrote in his diary, "How it wounds my heart to think of him as a traitor to his family." This is a knapsack. Over here is a saddle valise, and below, riding gauntlets made from badger hide. I found this highly interesting. The museum has several items once owned by Confederate General Robert E. Lee, such as his personal hat, his sidearm, an 1851 Colt revolver, his personal haversack. The bit he used on his personal horse, Traveler, and the general's personal field glasses. Fantastic! Here's a couple of oddities of war. Captain William Wright of Company F, 55th Virginia Infantry, was wounded on 30 June 1863 at the Battle of Glendale, which is just 13 miles southeast of the museum. He was struck down by this mini-ball which passed through his canteen. Captain Wright later died from this wound. Here's a rarity, a rosette formed by a near-perfect collision between a Confederate and Union bullet. This specimen was found in 1866 at the Spotsylvania Courthouse battlefield, which was 2 years after that engagement. Here's another very well-known Confederate general, J.E.B. Stewart, and a variety of his personal items. This is his campaign desk, his pistol, saber, hat and gauntlets. They even have his personal riding boots and his horse's bridle. Amazing! Here are some examples of some very intricate rings that were crafted by some POWs to help pass their time during incarceration. This brass-looking barrel is the business end of a spar torpedo. The world's very first submarine, the CSS Hunley, used one of these to sink the USS Housatonic. Filled with gunpowder and hung from a long pike with a point on the end, which you can see in the background, it was rammed into the wooden hull of a ship. A long lanyard allowed the ramming vessel to back away, and a quick pull would set off the explosive. As you move through the exhibits, you progress through the war's timeline, and I have moved to April 1865. And the surrender of Robert E. Lee to General Grant at Appomattox. And this is the actual saddle that Robert E. Lee rode on his trusty horse Traveler to the McLean House where the surrender papers were signed. The Confederate battle flag in the background was obtained by President Lincoln's 12-year-old son, Tad Lincoln, when he accompanied the president to Richmond on 4 April 1865. While the flag's exact origin is not known, Tad's birthday was also on the 4th of April, and it is quite likely that the flag was presented to the president's son as a memento of the occasion. This display case has some interesting things. That's a wooden prosthetic leg, once used by Wilfred Hodgson of the 9th Virginia Infantry. Hodgson was wounded at Gettysburg and eventually lost his leg due to that wound. The cabinet also has some nice medals and ribbons of various unit reunions that took place after the war. The Lee Monument unveiling, May 29, 1890. This white ribbon is the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Manassas, also commonly known as Bull Run. This one was for both Union and Confederate veterans. Manassas, Virginia, July 21, 1911. Looks like a United Confederate Veterans reunion, Richmond in 1922. This looks to be a membership pendant for Union Veterans Post number 159 of the Grand Army of the Republic. The red ribbon is from a reunion of Hood's Brigade in Floresville, Texas that took place in 1897. Another membership ribbon. This one from the Abraham Lincoln Post number 11 of the Grand Army of the Republic, September 3rd, 1889. And the last one, unfortunately, I cannot make out. All of these really bring the war to life for me. Personal mementos of these long-lost veterans who continue to remember their service, their sacrifice, and their loss during this tumultuous period for the rest of their lives. And I am now back out in the museum lobby where the original foundry wall is located, which means it's time to do a bit of outdoor exploring. What's left of the mill today is but a dim shadow of what the ironworks looked like in its heyday. The majority of the structures are either gone or lay in ruins. As I mentioned earlier, the ironworks were established here in 1837. Business likely reached its peak in the decade after the war, when Richmond and the South were rebuilding. By 1873, Tredegar employed over 1,200 workers. That same year, the company made a fateful decision. The economic panic of 1873 hit the company financially hard. As a result, it could not afford the cost of transitioning to manufacturing steel. That decision would secure the eventual demise of the company. Tredegar remained in business for the rest of the 19th century and into the first half of the 20th century. But business dwindled. Steel was king, and the demand for iron quickly waned, sealing the company's fate. While the company did supply iron to the U.S. military during both World War I and II, when World War II ended in 1945, the company had come to the end of its life. Today, it's a National Historic Site, and what remains of the structures, buildings, and machinery is at least being protected from further decay. These look like water turbine housings, likely used to turn equipment inside the building. That was a fantastic day out and explore. I would definitely recommend coming to the site if you have any interest in the American Civil War and you find yourself anywhere near the city of Richmond. Remember, life is a journey. Enjoy the ride, and thanks for watching.